Good evening, folks. My name is Dr. Joe Bargione. I'm the lead psychologist for the Jefferson County Public Schools, and I'd like to welcome everybody here to our presentation tonight. And then also, we're live streaming this for our families who were not able to make it here. And then, so there may be some people watching us live streaming, and then it'll also be posted on our district's website. So later on, if people like to review it, the presentation, they can do so at that time. Before I introduce our speaker this evening, I just wanted to give you, a little history of why we're here this evening. In 2010, the state passed a law that said all middle school and high school students and certified staff, like teachers and principals, must receive information on suicide prevention before September 1st of each year. So since 2002, we've been training our staff and our students on suicide prevention. Over the years, as we've been developing our process, we thought what a wonderful opportunity it would be to have our parents also trained in it. So this is the first year we're actually providing a training for our parents, because we believe that if we can give parents some tools and some ideas on how to talk to their children if they are thinking about suicide, then that could be it may be a difficult conversation to have, but it'll be a good conversation to have with your child. So that's the reason why we developed this training this evening. Okay, so in the future, if parents, we'll give parents some tools how to recognize the warning signs of suicide, and then also what links can they go to, or what community agencies or partners they can go to help get support for that child. Okay, so that's a little bit of the history. And what I'd like to do now is introduce our speaker, but before I do that, I can give you a little bit of some information about her. Dr. Laura Fry is a professor in the Kent School of Social Work. Excuse me, sorry about that. She received a doctorate and her master's degree from the University of Kentucky. She has published articles on suicidology in various refereed journals or peer-reviewed journals, and she's been at the University of Louisville since 2015. As her role as a professor at U of L, she's also a licensed marriage family therapist, and she's a board-approved clinical supervisor. She also currently served as the program chair for the 2016 annual conference for the American Association of Suicidology. She has many years of experience in this area, so we're really excited to have Dr. Laura Fry with us tonight. Dr. Fry.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. All right. Well, I appreciate you all coming out here tonight. I know this isn't a topic that typically people feel comfortable talking about. It can be a little bit scary to talk about sometimes, and a lot of times we think it's not going to happen to us. But we definitely wanted to give you some tools to be able to have these conversations, because we know that it can be a little awkward, it can be a little scary sometimes, and we want you to feel prepared to have those conversations and to have some ideas kind of in your back pocket, especially if it ever comes up with one of your loved ones. So what I'm going to do first is actually I want to start off with just a really brief 3-minute video. It's from the Mayo Clinic. It's something that's it's really great. They have some youth talking about some really brief tips that I just want to start out with for us tonight. So let me get that started. I actually had this prepared and pulled up right before it got started, so I'm not sure what the issue is here. Well, it seems like it's loading. Well, I might just go ahead through, if that's okay. If it happens to load at the end, I can try to play it. I'm going to run through a lot of the tips that they're talking about in there, but one of the things that I really like about this video, and we can send the link and maybe post it with the online video that's available of this live stream. If we something that I like about the video is that it's actually youth talking, and it's talking about a lot of the common things that you might hear your own kids saying at home, some of the things that are just common experiences, and some of them maybe they'll be a little bit more severe, whether it's mood swings that we know that all of our youth have from time to time, and even ourselves, some struggles or problems that they might face, and sometimes it might be a little bit more severe than that. It might be a little bit more. And so it's a really great video that really just encapsulates in about 3 minutes kind of some tips to take away. Well, that's disappointing. I'm not sure why it won't work there. Okay, well, to start off, just to tell you a little bit about why is this so important, why are you here? There's one young person dies by suicide every hour and 25 minutes in the US, and that's something that's staggering. Like I said, a lot of times parents will say this isn't going to happen to me, or this isn't something that I've experienced, but we know that a lot of families have known somebody who's died by suicide, or they've lost a loved one to suicide. We know that it's something that's a lot more common than people expect. For adults 25 and over, suicide's the 10th leading cause of death. And these are absolutely preventable deaths, right? These are things that we should be able to stop happening. And the 10th leading cause is a little bit misleading because we know, especially for adults, that's something that's rising even more. Those rates are rising for middle-aged men in particular, for seniors. If you try to break it up into these individual demographics, it's happening a lot more often in those populations. For youth that are ages 15 to 24, if we think about that middle, high school, maybe college age, that age range, suicide's the 2nd leading cause of death. And that's certainly not what we want to see, right? That's such a high rate, the 2nd leading cause of death. The thing that's always really staggering to me is the idea of, yes, we see these numbers of deaths by suicide and that they're so staggering and they're very shocking to see how common it is, but that non-fatal attempts, people who attempt suicide and survive, those are happening even more often. There's roughly 25 attempts occur for every death by suicide in the US. But if we separate that out for youth, again, that ages 15 to 24, it's so much higher. It's roughly 1 to 200 attempts for each death. And that doesn't mean one person is attempting that many times, but it just means out of all the people, there's that many people who have survived an attempt compared to each death. Those are people who are at risk of maybe reattempting. Those are people who maybe their families don't know that they've attempted. Those are people that we can reach out to in our communities to use the skills that we're talking about tonight to have that conversation, to reach out and say, I'm here, I see you, and I want to help. Like Joe just mentioned, in 2010, the Kentucky passed this state law, and something that's so great is here with JCPS is that they're using evidence-based curriculums with your youth. They're using those programs to give your youth the information about warning signs to look for, not just in themselves, but maybe in their friends, that they can be the lookout if they see somebody that they're concerned about. It also gives them great materials for who to go to for help, who's somebody to talk to, who's available for them. So it's giving them all those great tools. One of the big concerns that I've heard is related to these programs is that some parents have that fear of talking about suicide. If my kid comes to school and they hear about suicide, it's somehow going to make them suicidal. And this is something that's actually one of the big myths around suicide, is that somehow talking about it is going to make somebody suicidal. When in reality, we know that talking about suicide actually provides an excellent opportunity for a dialogue. It provides an opportunity for a conversation. It lets somebody know that you're okay talking about it, that yes, it might be scary, and it's really fearful to have a loved one come to you and say they're thinking about suicide or they're wanting to hurt themselves. But it lets them know that you're okay. Even though that's uncomfortable and that's scary, you want to help. You want to be there. So how do you start that conversation? one of the ways, because we know that talking about suicide is a way to start that dialogue, to let them know that you're okay talking about it, one of the things to do is even just to have a conversation about suicide in general. It can be one way to ease into the conversation of maybe you don't want to just come out and ask, are you thinking about suicide? Maybe you want to ask about, you're not seeing any warning signs or anything right now to ask that question directly, but maybe you want to talk about, have they ever seen anything with a friend? Do they have anybody that they're worried about? Do they have any questions? Are they confused about this idea of suicide and what it is? So how do you just start that conversation in general? Well, one way is certainly pick a time whenever you know you're going to have your child's attention, right? And this is no different than talking to your kids about, say, substance use or risky sexual behavior, right? They say, try to pick a time when you know you guys aren't going to be distracted by anything, you're going to have that time together. So that could be, for example, in the car. Or maybe you're both sitting down watching TV together, that type of thing. Or maybe they've just come home from school and you know they just heard about that topic that day at school. So, and then think about what you want to say ahead of time. I know for anybody, whenever I get anxious talking in front of people or whenever I'm having a tough conversation with a loved one, sometimes that anxiety can just make my mind go blank. So just trying to think ahead of time, what are some things that I want to talk about? What are some of the key points that I want to hit whenever I'm having this conversation? So you can even think about, how am I going to have a starting point? How am I going to have a point to lead into the conversation? And that way you can use those things around you of, hey, I just heard that there was this, maybe a celebrity that your family adored that's recently died by suicide. Or maybe you know that there's, your school is putting on a suicide prevention program and that there's these materials. Maybe there's a news piece that just came on that somebody's lost a loved one to suicide. Using that as a catalyst for starting that conversation, for saying, I saw the school's having this program. What did you think about that? What was your reaction? Saying things of, hey, I saw that in the magazine you're reading, there's the mention of suicide. Have you ever been concerned about a friend? Using that as a leading point to have that conversation. Another great piece is to be honest, right? If it's uncomfortable for you to talk about, it's probably also uncomfortable for your youth to talk about or for your loved ones to talk about, and being honest about that. This is a tough conversation to have, right? This is something that's uncomfortable, but I think that we should do it. And being honest about that can sometimes open the floor for maybe your kid or your youth to say, yeah, it is awkward. Yeah, it's uncomfortable. But letting them know that even though you recognize that, or maybe you both have questions about what to do, even just acknowledging that together can be a great way to open the conversation. There's some example things up here of, it's hard for me to talk about, so I imagine it is for you too. But I think that we should. We should have this conversation. You could even say, I never thought this was something I'd be talking to you about, but I think it's really important. Right? Letting them know that even if that awkwardness is there or it's a little uncomfortable, it's scary, you still want to talk about it. Next, asking directly for your child's response. And so this could be, maybe you're not seeing warning signs yet, or maybe you're not concerned about them right there, but going ahead and asking about it. What do you think about suicide? Is it something any of your friends talk about? Has it ever come up in conversation? Even asking, the statistics make it sound pretty common. Have you ever thought about it? What about your friends? Starting that dialogue of, even if it's not something you're worried about right then, just have you ever thought about it? Have you ever been concerned about somebody? And hearing what they think or what they've thought about. Next, listening closely to what your child has to say. A lot of times in the work that I do, so I'm, like he mentioned, I'm a therapist, but I'm also a researcher. And the work that I do is I look specifically at this idea of disclosure. How can we get people to talk about it, right? How can we make them feel like it's okay to talk? And so in my work, I go directly to attempt survivors, and I ask them, who did you tell? Who didn't you tell? Why didn't you tell them? Or why did you, right? How did they know it was safe or it wasn't safe to tell? And what I'm learning is that I'm hearing over and over this idea of, well, they didn't ask, or they didn't seem to want to talk about it. And so following up on those questions, asking the follow-up of, I want to learn more. So you said you thought about this at one point. What was that like? Or maybe, you said you're worried about a friend. Tell me more about that. What's going on there? Right? Asking those follow-up questions. And if you hear something that worries you, be really honest about that concern. You said that in the past, it's something you had thought about one time. That really concerns me. When was the last time you thought about that? Or how did you stop having those types of thoughts, right? Not being afraid to follow up with those questions. And then finally, the idea of don't over or underreact, which I know is a little bit of a catch-22 there. But thinking about that, we know that whenever you hear a loved one say that they're thinking about suicide, or you hear a loved one saying that they're having thoughts of wanting to hurt themselves, that's scary. That's really, really scary. And our first instinct can be to panic, and maybe you want to put them in a little bubble, right, to keep them safe. Or to say, some parents I've seen have that reaction of, oh, don't say that, you don't mean that, right? In my past work, whenever I was working in a hospital doing assessments, I would often have that reaction where it's hard for parents to hear those nitty-gritty details, right? But letting them know that trying to have that reaction of I'm, not overreacting in the moment, but saying this is scary for me, but I want to talk about this. Let's go get help together. Let's go talk to somebody together, right? And also by don't underreact is that idea of minimizing. Too often we have parents who they may not realize that their youth is being serious. They might think it was said off the cuff, or they might think it was said just to be, to get attention or to be manipulative. That's another big myth. But anytime somebody says something about wanting to hurt themselves, that's when we want to follow up on that, right? We don't ever want to assume somebody's just saying it for attention or just to be manipulative, right? So how do I know if my child is at risk? Now, you'll see one of the tables here tonight is the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention, and they have an excellent website that'll be on the link at the end of this presentation, but they also have some great handouts where they're listing those warning signs, right? What are some things, say you're having this conversation with your youth and you're talking about just suicide in general, trying to set the stage for having this conversation, and maybe you've seen some warning signs. How do you know if your child's at risk? What are some things to look for you as the parent? Because we know you're on the front line seeing your kid day in and day out. So what are some things that you can look for? Well, for one thing, what are they saying, right? The talk. What are the spoken things that they might be saying? So the first one here is wanting to die or kill themselves. And that might seem like an obvious one whenever in a setting like this. But that goes back to that idea of sometimes we may take things as, well, it was a joke. It was said just in passing or under their breath, right? They might not think that they're serious. But following up any types of comments like that, that's something that's a warning sign. That's something to look into. That's something to ask about and follow up on. The idea of feeling hopeless, feeling like things are never going to change, it's always going to be this way, feeling trapped. The idea of being a burden to others. And they may not come out and say, I'm a burden, right? That's not a phrase that we often say in conversation, but maybe they'll say things like, people would be better off without me, right? I'm no good to anybody around me. Nobody cares if I'm here, right? The idea of experiencing unbearable pain, just talking about it's too much to bear. I can't do this anymore. The idea of having no reason to live, going back to, nobody would miss me if I'm gone. I have nothing to look forward to. And certainly if they've said anything directly about hurting themselves. So the other thing to think about, not just spoken things, but behaviors. What are some things you can look for without requiring somebody to say something out loud, right? So what are those behaviors? Well, certainly the increased use of alcohol or drugs. So this is something that we know with, say, high school, for example. That's probably common. They're going to be exposed to alcohol or drugs and friends. They may be experimenting or doing things like that. But what's something that's extreme? Are you noticing an out of normal behavior, right? Something that's completely out of character for them. Or maybe it's getting so extreme that they're sleeping all of the time, or maybe they're missing school. Anytime looking for a way to kill themselves, if there's even any preoccupation with death, maybe there's drawings, maybe there's doodling, something where the theme seems to center around this idea of death. And certainly doing online searches. Now, one of the greatest things with Google is that anytime you're searching something that has the word suicide in it, immediately the National Suicide Hotline, their number pops up as one of the first things in Google. This happened to me just last night. I was doing a presentation on myths about suicide. And so I wanted to check for some other resources just to see, is there anything else that I'm not including that I should think about? And that was immediately what popped up, even though that's not what I was specifically looking for. I think that's something that's so great. Certainly acting recklessly. This could be doing things where we see sometimes with youth and with adults. Maybe they're not saying directly, I'm going to hurt myself. I'm going to do something to cause harm to myself. But maybe they're just going to passively engage in behavior that might result in that. For example, reckless driving, reckless sexual behavior, that type of idea where they just don't care if they live or die. Looking for those types of behaviors. Withdrawing from activities, this is probably the most common, one of the factors that most people could name off the top of their head is this idea of that they're not engaging in those behaviors that they used to do, right? Maybe they really used to enjoy a particular hobby, but they're just not doing that anymore. Isolating from family or friends, feeling like they don't want to hang out with anybody anymore. They just want to be alone. Sleeping too much or too little. And that's another one of those things where it might seem like a catch-22, but that's something that for you all as parents, you know your youth the best. You know what their typical sleep patterns look like, right? So maybe if they used to go to bed at 10 every night and now they're staying up till 2, 3, 4 in the morning, right? That's something that's out of the norm. Or maybe they're coming home and going straight to bed, not wanting to see anybody and just sleeping all evening. That's something that's not their normal pattern, and that's something that you would see. Visiting or calling people to say goodbye, giving away prized possessions, and even aggression. Sometimes in youth, and this is especially true for small children, but even for middle school, high school youth, sometimes whenever they're depressed or they're anxious, it comes out as anger. It comes out as aggression, as getting into fights, as throwing materials, as destroying property, right? So that's something else that could be a warning sign. Finally, what about mood? These are other warning signs that you can look for. So some of those are depression, loss of interest, rage, irritability, some humiliation, which is something else that could be especially common with middle and high school, anxiety, and extreme mood swings. And some of these are going to be experiences that's common for all of us. We experience a range of these emotions, right? But whenever it's a persistent state, it's getting to where it's affecting their day-to-day activities, their willingness to engage in other things, it's impacting their interest in other activities or their willingness to maybe interact with other people, right? That's something to look for. And so if you take any one of these warning signs, if you take just one of them, it doesn't seem like much by itself, right? But when you start looking at the bigger picture and you see several of these starting to come together at the same time, that's whenever we should be concerned. That's where we want to reach out and say, hey, I'm seeing that this is what's happening. I'm seeing these mood swings. It seems like you don't want to play sports anymore. It doesn't seem like you want to hang out with your friends. I want to know what's going on. I'm worried you're thinking about hurting yourself, right? Looking for these types of warning signs are things that we can all do, whether it's with our youth or with our loved ones, with other adults, with friends, coworkers, that kind of thing. So how do you respond if your child is at risk? So say you're having that conversation and your youth says, yes, I have thought about it. I have thought about wanting to hurt myself, or I do feel that way now. Well, some things to avoid saying are, that's crazy, don't be so dramatic. Like I said before, that phrase of, well, that's an awful thing to say. Don't say that, right? You're making too much of this. That exam isn't worth getting upset over, or that boy or that girl, that grade, right? If you say, well, that's not going to solve anything. You're just trying to get attention, or you're not going to do that. You wouldn't hurt yourself. Those types of dismissive comments. These are all versions of stigma, of saying that it's not okay how they're feeling, it's not normal. It's a way of saying, I don't want to hear about it, I don't want to talk about it. These are all those subtle messages that are coming out underneath a lot of these statements. And a lot of times those are things that make people feel like, well, they can't talk about it. And they'll say, well, I just won't tell anybody then, and I'll keep this to myself. And that's the really dangerous thing. So one of my complaints with a lot of resources for families is they'll often give things not to say, but they don't often tell us then what to replace that with. So I wanted to do that for you all tonight, and saying, what are some things that you can say instead? Again, because if we're just sitting there and we're not really sure what to say or what to do, it can be hard to come up off the top of our head, especially if we're really nervous and panicky and afraid for our loved one. So what are some things you can say? Saying things like, I'm sorry you're feeling so bad. I'm really glad you told me about this. I want to know. I can handle it. This isn't too scary. Yes, I'm scared, but I can handle it. Let's get through this together. The idea of even just asking an honest question, how can I help? Or maybe you're in a situation where you can't really understand or relate to what they're feeling, and you can be honest about that and use that as a question of, I've never felt that way before. Tell me, I want to understand though, tell me. I want to know how you're feeling. The idea of let's get through this together, let's keep you safe, let's find someone who can help. Making it even a group effort so that that person isn't alone in that dark feeling that they have in that moment. These are all excellent things to say. And these are the types of things that keep that conversation going, letting the person know they're not alone, that you're right there with them. Letting them know that even if you don't have the answer right then, you guys can go find that answer together. All right, so what I'm going to do for you once here is just have a really brief role play. And this isn't, I'm not going to make any of you role play, so you guys can have a sigh of relief. I'm just going to demonstrate kind of a role play of just even how to have that initial conversation of how to get it started talking about the topic of suicide. And this isn't meant to be a one conversation, end it there, never address it again, but just here's a daily conversation you could have, what that might look like, and then how that could be a springboard for having future conversations about this. Opening a dialogue to let them know that it's okay to talk about. It's something that you're not going to shy away from. So I'm going to have Sarah Williams come up here with me. She is a recent graduate of the Kent School of Social Work, and she's going to give me some help here. We only have one microphone, so we're both going to have to talk into it. But she's going to play my daughter. I'm going to play mom. All right. Think you can lean into that? All right. So how was school today?
Fine.
I received a note that they're going to cover suicide prevention. Did that happen?
Yep.
Well, tell me about it. I imagine it's a different topic to talk about at school.
Yeah, it was fine.
What was something new that you learned?
Well, I guess sometimes we can be kind of lookouts for our friends.
What do you mean?
Like, sometimes we might notice that our friends need help before somebody else would.
Oh, interesting. Did they tell you how to tell if your friend needs help?
Yeah, like if we hear our friends say they can't do it anymore, or if we hear them make a comment about wanting to hurt themselves.
I think that's great they told you what to look for. I imagine that'd be scary to hear a friend say.
Yeah.
Have you ever been worried about a friend?
What do you mean?
I was just wondering if you've ever heard a friend say something that made you worried, kind of like what they mentioned today, or say they'd hurt themselves or wonder if they needed help from an adult.
Kind of.
What happened?
Well, just, I don't know.
I'm starting to wonder if you're worried about someone.
Maybe, but I just don't want to get her in trouble.
Well, I bet a lot of people feel that way. And I'm sure you don't want to betray someone if they trusted you enough to talk to you. But part of being a good friend is looking out for the ones we care for.
Yeah, I know.
Well, why don't you tell me a bit without telling me their name?
Well, there is someone who hasn't really been hanging out with us as much. She never comes out when we invite her, and she's really quiet when we're all hanging out at school. She just seems really sad. I saw her start to cry the other day, and I asked her if she was okay, but she wouldn't really talk about it.
Is this Rachel? This sounds like your friend Rachel.
Mom!
Okay, I know, sorry. That had to be hard to hear.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, the other day, I saw her post on her Snapchat story saying that nobody would miss her if she was gone.
Do you think she was thinking about hurting herself?
Oh, I don't know. I don't want her to get locked up.
What do you mean locked up?
You know, like if she got in trouble and then they wouldn't let her go back home.
I understand that. I mean, I don't think she'll get in trouble. I think they'll just want to make sure she's safe.
But how do you know if that's what they need to stay safe?
Honestly, I'm not sure. I think a doctor decides. It sounds like you're really worried about her.
Yeah.
Does anybody else know?
Not that I know of. Nobody else was listening while we were talking about it.
Would you feel comfortable telling your school counselor tomorrow?
I don't know. Maybe. I might be able to stop in at lunch.
I think it's a good idea. I mean, it sounds like your friend, not to be named, is going through a hard time, and it's a lot for you to carry on your shoulders. It'd be a good idea to have someone else help you, someone you can look out for, that can help you look out and see if she needs help. I wonder if her parents know what's happening.
I don't know if they do or not, but what happens if we try to help and they end up taking her to the hospital?
I'm not sure. I imagine they'll only do it if they think she needs it, but I really don't know. What if we called someone together to ask? We could both figure out how it works.
Yeah, maybe later.
Okay. Have you ever had feelings like this?
Like wanting to hurt myself?
Yeah.
Not really. I mean, last year was really hard and I didn't have as many friends.
I didn't know about that.
Yeah, well, it's no big deal. Everybody was really busy and had their own stuff going on.
I still wish I had known, though. I would have liked to have known.
I wasn't going to hurt myself or anything.
Well, I hope that you would tell me if it ever got to that point. I'm sorry you were feeling so bad, but I'm glad that you told me now. You know, no matter how busy we get, I know we're always running around like crazy and things like that, but I hope you know that you can come to me when you're feeling like that. I can handle it. I'd want to know.
Okay.
And maybe if you don't want to talk to me about it, I know I'm your mom, lame or whatever, but we can find somebody else who you would feel okay talking to.
Okay, I think that'd be okay.
All right, then. Do you want to keep talking about this?
No, not really.
Okay, we can stop. Just know I know it's scary to talk about, and it's awkward sometimes, but I'm always here to talk more.
I know, Mom. Thanks.
Okay. Can we give Sarah a round of applause for helping? She got roped into it. So that wasn't meant to be a end conversation, right? It would be following up the next day, talking about getting the friend some help, having that conversation. Maybe following up more with, I was thinking about what you said the other day about you feeling really down last year. I want to know more about that. What was that like for you? Continuing that conversation even later. And we know with adolescents, even with adults sometimes, if you're talking about a tough topic, they're not going to engage right away, or they might not want to talk, right? So continually asking questions, and those open-ended questions to say, well, what was something new that you learned? Or what did you think about it? Was there anything that stood out to you? Trying to keep that conversation going, and not just, if they don't want to talk about it, not just stopping it right there. And it's okay to allow yourself to have a conversation that you don't have to run over all the material all at once, but having gradual conversations over time, it's going to open that road of communication, right? It's going to let them know that you're okay talking about it and that you want to talk about it. Some other things, if somebody's resistant and they're still not wanting to talk, certainly you can ask about maybe why they're not wanting to talk. Maybe they're afraid of what would happen if they tell the truth. Maybe they're afraid of going to the hospital. We know that going to the hospital is not portrayed greatly on TV, in movies, right? They make it sound like you're just going to be dropped up and kept there for weeks, and that's not what happens, right? But for the average person, for most of us, if we haven't worked in a hospital like that, we don't know what's going to happen. So our kid might come to us and say, what would happen, and we don't know. And if that's the case, don't hesitate to call up, say, the Brook or Our Lady of Peace or 7 counties and ask those questions of, hey, I have these concerns, but I'm not sure what to do or what's going to happen. And so I'll leave today with a slide that just talks about some of those resources that you can go to for more information. But also, if they're still not wanting to talk, even if you're able to assuage some of those fears, you can even just leave them with some information. There's some great crisis lines or text lines that they could use. Or even saying, you know what, if you don't want to talk to me, that's fine, but let's make us a list of some people you can talk to, you do want to talk to. Whether it's a pastor or a minister, whether it's a school counselor, whether it's an aunt or uncle, a grandparent, a friend in the community, somebody that they feel like they could go to. That's also something that's common. Whenever we're interviewing attempt survivors, some of the things that they'll say of why they didn't tell people will be, well, I didn't want to worry them. I didn't want to overwhelm them. So sometimes having somebody else that they can talk to can also be really helpful. So these are the resources that I want to leave you all with. On the left side, you'll see some local resources. There's 7 counties has a 24/7 crisis line. There's one for adults, for youth. There's the Brook, Our Lady of Peace. Those last 2 are ones that you can specifically call if you're worried about what's going to happen if I take somebody to the hospital. How do I know if I need to take somebody to the hospital? You can give them a call and they'll give you all of that information. Today's just a really brief overview for all of you, so there's even more information there. There's also district options on your school website, which the link is right there, and it's on the handouts. But you can also get more information. Is there a specific counselor in your district that you can go to? On the right side, you'll see some national resources. And the great things about these is they're available 24/7, similar to that 7 counties line. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is always available. The Trevor Project is specifically for LGBTQ youth. And if you go on their website, if you even just Google the Trevor Project, they actually have some other resources of specific times that there's an online chat or there's texting that you can get more information. There's the Trans Lifeline, which is actually the people who answer the calls identify as transgender themselves, and they're able to empathize on a way that a lot of people need to hear. The crisis text line is one especially for adolescents. If they're not comfortable talking on the phone, they can even text, and that's something that's available 24/7. Some other resources at the bottom, those last 2 are more for you all. The Society for the Prevention of Teen Suicide, which is some material that was in here, came from them. Their website's available, as well as the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, which has a really strong Louisville chapter here in the community, and their table's actually in the back with lots of resources and free materials, and they put on lots of free programs for you all. So you can reach out to them for more information. That's all that I have for you today. You'll notice that with your handouts, there's a note card if you want to write down a question, if you want to pass them in, or I can also hand over the microphone and let you all ask directly. Oh, I see some coming up here. Let's do that. Thank you. Any others that they have? Okay, if you end up having one, if you just want to, you can pass it up to the front row, and Sarah will, will hand it to me here. So the first question here is, do suicides happen more during the holidays? That's typically, that's kind of another misconception, in that a lot of people think that they do happen more during the holidays, but they actually don't. We know that holidays can be a hard time for people, but it's not something that there's this huge uptick in suicides during that time. The second one is, does suicide attempts or completions happen more in families or in the general population? We do know that there is a link between having a family history of suicide. If you've lost a loved one to suicide, that's something that can put you more at risk of dying yourself by suicide. And the connection there is something that the research doesn't fully understand yet, of why that connection occurs, whether it's something that's necessarily genetic or whether it's more about interpersonal styles or something about family dynamics. There's nothing that really tells us what that is. That's something why say AFSP in the back, they have so many great resources for loss survivors. Whether you're a youth who've lost a friend, whether you're adult, whether you're a parent who's lost a child, they have so many great resources to create that sense of community and make sure that all loss survivors, someone who's lost somebody to suicide, that all of them are well supported. Let's see here. This one says, are youth that have been diagnosed with PTSD or attachment disorder at a higher risk? Well, we do know that those who do have a mental health diagnosis of some kind, whether it's depression, PTSD, anxiety, and attachment disorder, we know that those diagnosed with some type of disorder like that or mental health issue, we know that they're more at risk. But with that in mind, we also know that doesn't mean that it's inevitable. That doesn't mean that those not diagnosed aren't at risk at all. We just know that it may happen more often in that population, but that's certainly something that we want to look for those warning signs. And hopefully if they have that diagnosis, that also means that they're getting some help, that they're in treatment, that they're working with somebody who can also help you as a parent look out for those warning signs, right? And that's why something else we want to put on here put on this information so that you also know what to look for. Are there any other questions? Any that come to mind? No? All right. Well, I hope that you stick around. There's lots of information here from 7 counties, from the Brook, from the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention. Stay and look at materials. And definitely, if you're watching the live stream, click on links to get more information. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. I just want to take a minute and say thank you all for coming out tonight. I know that this is not an easy topic to talk about, but I commend you for coming out and taking that first step. You know, it's estimated that approximately 775,000 families in Kentucky are impacted by suicide each year, either by attempts or by completion. And that's not all necessarily with students or with children. And so as you take this information, I know it was very much geared towards students and adolescents, but the same information applies to if you're working with adults in your life. So if you have a friend or a loved one or a coworker that also exhibit these signs, please follow up with them the same way you would your children. Ask them if they need help. Ask them if they're contemplating hurting themselves, and if they are, direct them to the same resources that we shared with you tonight. We're going to stick around, so if you have any questions, we'd be more than happy to answer. And for those that are watching on live stream, we're going to have all of the information online that you can click on as well. If you have further questions and you're concerned with your child or with a friend of your child or with a family member, I encourage you to talk to your school counselor, and they can get you help and they can direct you in the right way if you're unsure of where to go. With that said, thank you all, and I hope you have a great night.